Hello and welcome to the section Exploring the Azure RM PowerShell module. In this section, we're going to explore the commandlets and the modules that we'll be focusing on in this course. We'll also take a look at the PowerShell constructs and techniques and some of the things that go into using PowerShell, including working with simple and complex object properties. This is everything from a property of an object like a virtual machine where it's located to the complex object properties that go into that virtual machine, like network settings, which are actually a whole lot of collection of properties all built up and stored into one property inside that VM. We'll also take a look at filtering objects and properties. And then we're going to take a look at some of the concepts and the parameters that you need to know to really get the most out of Azure RM module. And finally, we're going to make sure that you know how to stay up to date, updating your modules and keeping tabs on them at the GitHub repositories. Welcome to the video Exploring the Commandlets in the Azure RM Modules. In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the commandlets from the specific modules that we'll be using in this course. Then we're going to highlight some of the commands. We're going to review parameters and parameter sets and see how to use them. Here we are in the Azure RM. We've got our Visual Studio Code. Azure RM is loaded and we are connected to Azure. We can list out the modules that are available to us, and if you're curious about what types of commands or modules are available in, say, the storage components for Azure RM, you can use get module Azure RM star storage star, and then the parameter list available. And we can see that we do have the Azure RM storage module. Now, this is not something that you're going to have to know all the time because PowerShell makes these commands that are inside of this available to you. What I'm trying to highlight here is that the module itself, Azure RM Storage, is just one of the many modules that are loaded up when we load Azure RM. Another way to find commands that are from Azure RM is to look for the command itself, star disk star, in the module Azure RM star. And we'll notice that even if you had thought the disk commands would surely be in storage, that's not always the case. In fact, I don't think we have really any disk commandlets that are part of the storage module. We do have them in compute, and that's great because in this course we're going to focus a lot on the compute and the storage and the network modules. And take a look at some of this. Look at this command here, new Azure RM Recovery Services ASR. But it's so long, we can't even complete the whole thing with all this space here. And this is just to kind of point out that some of the commandlets that we're going to be using, these are very long commandlets and really tough to remember. So we're going to gain some familiarity with some of the most popular and useful commandlets, but trying to remember the specifics about something like remove Azure RM VM disk encryption extension. This is just something that we don't need to do. We're going to leverage IntelliSense and Visual Studio Code to take care of that for us. In fact, we can also here use get command for get Azure RM VM. And boy, this really highlights again how much more complicated is this. With one point that this would just be get VM. That was kind of what we got with PowerShell. You would get, and then the object that you're trying to get. Throughout the Azure RM modules, we see this Azure RM at the start of every noun. And this is an indicator to let us know what grouping or what family of modules the commandlet is from. In fact, get VM itself is I believe, just a Hyper-V, or I believe that is the command for Hyper-V. Now, you might have thought something more like get Azure VM. Well, Azure RM VM is not the first Azure commandlets. In fact, if you've been using Azure for a long time, you may remember a couple of years ago as they started to switch from the old portal to the new portal. And when they made that transition, they were also transitioning from Azure Service Manager to Azure Resource Manager. So we do get the Azure RM, which is a set of commandlets for working with the new portal, now really the only portal, and now we get Azure RM VM. just what we wanted. One of the goals of this course is that we improve our PowerShell through the practice of Azure RM IaaS resources. So we are really going to focus a lot of time and effort into building up and exploring the infrastructure as a service components of Azure RM. And so for that, we're going to be building a network, some storage accounts, and then some VM infrastructure. And on the topic of parameters, I wanted to mention that if we take a look here at the Get Azure RM VM, we can see the syntax, and this is worth pointing out that each of these is a parameter set. That is, different parameters can be used together in different groups. A good way to explain this is that in some cases you may have one parameter that makes other parameters not make sense in that context. In that case, you would have parameters in different sets. So we could use this Azure RM VM this way in this first parameter set. We could also use it in the second grouping or in this third grouping. All of them will work just fine. It just kind of depends on which parameters we are providing to the commandlet. And of these three parameters, you might think, well, boy, that's a lot of parameters there in the first and the third parameter set, but I'm really wanting to use the second parameter set because I don't have to provide so much information. Well, the VM here that we are providing with the PS virtual machine, we don't quite get out of it completely because we need to provide a lot of context to that. In fact, we can take a look at the online resources for the Get Help of new Azure RM VM, and we can see that there are a lot of parameters that go along with it. Not all of these are required. We really can get by with just the name of the VM and the credential, but then it's going to really be taking a lot of liberties with the VM, everything from whether it is a client or a server, or you may be wanting to specify that you're going to be getting a Linux VM of a specific size. We could see a very simple execution of the Azure RM commandlet, or a more complicated one. And this does correlate to creating a server or a virtual machine from the portal. If we are just going to spin up a Windows Server 2016 data center virtual machine, we have to provide it with the name of the VM. We have to specify what kind of hard disk it's going to have, how much hard disk it's going to have, whether it's going to be in a new or an existing resource group, where it's going to be, and that's just before we even get into any of the optional features like networking or choosing a virtual machine size. And none of this is really to get too deep into the VM infrastructure right now. We've got a whole section on that later, and we're going to dig deep into the virtual machines creation and setting and working with them in PowerShell. And in fact, we'll also be talking a lot about some of the other infrastructure as a service resources, including storage, networks. You notice that these go by really fast, and it's a lot of them. Of course, we're not going to be breaking down 276 different commandlets in the network module, but we will have a lot of fun exploring that network module. And the same with Azure RM Compute, where we're going to be exploring virtual machines and making sure that we really know them inside and out. And we'll be taking a look at some of the best of those 168 commandlets in the Azure RM.Compute module.